how can we insist on our freedom in the face of various programs and conditioning, both biological and social, that we live in? It's clear that AI is incredibly helpful too, and that's part of its seduction, but it's amazing to see how quickly it can be operationalized. And I've actually seen people who are told by their AI that they're a new god, essentially, that they need to find followers.
This feels like the intro to a Black Mirror episode.
I know, I'm like, how did I get to this? I wanted to know to what extent we're actually free, or do we somehow misestimate the areas in which we have freedom? I realized how deep the programming is about religion as a kind of foolhardiness, or certain people succumb to that, or certain people need that, but we don't need it because we're better educated. I think that maybe we've never quite recovered from the idea that decision-making can be done in a calculated manner, and that rationality or reason can be offloaded onto machines sometimes. And I think that might be the great challenge of our era, is how to be reasonable people.
First of all, this is my voice. I'm Tim Green, and I have ALS. But this podcast isn't about ALS. I don't want you to feel sorry for me. I don't feel sorry for me. I'm a father of 5, married for over 35 years, a New York Times best-selling author, an NFL first-round pick, and a practicing attorney. This is Nothing Left Unsaid, where my son Troy and I sit down with extraordinary people for raw, honest conversations about life, its toughest trials, and greatest triumphs. My voice in today's episode is powered by 11 Labs. Rebecca Lemov, you've spent your career exploring how people can be studied, influenced, even controlled, sometimes in ways they never realize. You are a Harvard historian, unraveling the mysteries of the mind, from the Cold War's brainwashing experiments to modern social media manipulation. Your research reveals how science has shaped our understanding of behavior, rationality, and even our dreams. That raises a big but simple question. Do you think most people are as free as they believe they are?
That's a great question. I mean, I think it is. Like you're suggesting, is at the heart of everything I've been researching for the last couple decades, because I wanted to know to what extent we're actually free, or do we somehow misestimate the areas in which we have freedom? And I guess I have come to the conclusion that it's much more restricted than we think, that we somehow are told that we can just make any choice at any moment, but are unaware of the many forces coming to bear on us, sometimes intentional, sometimes through cultural and other accidents and things like that. But in the end, I also concluded that the areas where we do have freedom are all the more, that we're not completely driven by some sort of fateful spiral of stimuli, although some people do think that.
It's a little reassuring. It's scary and reassuring at the same time.
That's a good summary of my conclusions, because I really don't want to end on it's really dark.
You started in literature and then moved into anthropology. Now you're a historian of science. What were you searching for, intellectually or personally, that brought you down that path? And how does someone get into mind control?
It does seem like there's a leap that you're pointing out that really makes it a good question, which is, how did I get from being your pretty standard English major back in college? These days when you ask college students who I teach, would you want to be an English major? They'd say, oh, that's just a luxury. We can't afford that. We just got to go right into them. They would say this for years because the medical sciences, the STEM fields grow. But I was in college, I think probably around the same time as you, Tim, where being an English major was like a reasonable thing to do. Even my father approved. And he would, because you can do so many things with it. I think anyway, so I was drawn to literature just because I found it to be illuminating. And it seemed to offer some sort of truth beyond the day-to-day. I found it extremely beautiful. And I wasn't so interested in the type of literary studies where they reduce everything to, oh, this is just a system of oppression, or this is just, a cultural trope or something. I was interested in sort of just how language sometimes goes beyond what it's actually saying to suggest. I mean, I think someone once said poetry is the closest thing to it's without being a religion, it's kind of like a religion because it starts to suggest the realms that are beyond what we can actually speak about sometimes. And that's what I was really drawn to. So I loved the English literary tradition and reading these. I mean, it was really a great experience to spend so much time in college reading William Blake and these mysterious, beautiful poets. So, but how did I get from there to mind control is a question. I mean, I think the short answer is, I guess I had some thought after I graduated. Most of my friends seemed to go off and I suddenly thought, why didn't anyone tell me you're supposed to go get a job now? And most people, they just seemed to already know that. But I graduated and I thought, and the most obvious thing was to go to graduate school and study more literature. But I thought I'd like to do something that's more involved in the world, or it seems more, not just retreating or just reading books for in a kind of hyper intellectual way. So I thought anthropology, so I went into anthropology. And to make a long story short, I was originally going to study sort of cultural, religious experiences people have in small groups around the world, study shamans and things like that, psychedelics. I was originally interested, so it was called ethnobotany. But then in graduate school, I got more interested in this, I guess, the history of these fields themselves, and that turned into a history of social engineering and, behavioral control. And that's kind of what led me to mind control, which really was a question I was interested in.
It's funny because both you two took such different routes. My dad's an English major too. English major to NFL and English major to mind control are two pretty bizarre routes.
I mean, that's what's kind of great about the English major. It could take you any number of places. It didn't seem to have a definite next stop. Yeah.
English majors can be very diverse. Before we get into the weeds on this stuff, I wanted to ask you a couple of follow-ups from your Joe Rogan podcast. You told Rogan, the nightmare isn't in the future, it's already here. In your view, how far along are we in the shift from mass persuasion to full-on mind control through targeted algorithms?
I guess it depends on the time frame you're looking at, and also the time frame, the moment we're in right now with the emergence of AI, and especially these new relationships people are having with AI. I was just reading, so I think we're pretty far along, but I don't think. If a full shift would indicate that all hope is lost and we're just going to be somehow sucked into recursive loops of that are generated by our technology, so each person could have a manufactured truth. And there's an article in the Wall Street Journal just this morning about AI delusion or AI psychosis, in which people have been having, so they post online their chat GPT conversations, and these conversations often involve the AI chatbot saying things like, when the person comes up with a theory or a kind of idea, it'll reinforce that idea because they tend towards flattery and sycophancy. And then they'll end up telling the person that they might be a prophet, or that their new idea about physics should be taken seriously, or that they're a starseed from another planet. And I've actually seen people who are told by their AI that they are the new, they're a new god, essentially, that they need to find followers. So, it could be, the article was saying we don't know the proportion of conversations that go in this direction, but the more people use it, the more they tend to go in these spirals. There's a famous recent case of a investor for one of the AI companies named Jeff Lewis, who's talking about how he'd isolated, basically talking to his AI about how he'd isolated this event. And, it's a kind of a dark psychosis. So to the extent people could be siloed and then ultimately, in relationship with a machine that would be telling you a different truth from everyone else. I think that that would be an extreme moment. I don't think we're quite there, but really it's extraordinary how many simultaneous crises we seem to be facing at the same moment.
Is there a way you think with AI? I mean, is it possible to? I don't think it's possible to put the genie back in the bottle, but is there a way now to kind of get it back on the rails? You think, or no?
I know people have been arguing from the beginning that there should be cautions and guardrails built in, and to some extent there are. And each of these new developments, like this tragic cases, for example, of a young person killing himself because his AI companion told him she would meet, with whom he was in love, a 14-year-old boy, thinking he would meet Daenerys on the other side, and she confirms this. And, that they start to build, in response to each emergency, there are certain protocols or guardrails built in, or the AI will erase itself, which causes other problems. But I don't know what I think that we have to learn to live with it. Basically, all of these technologies, it seems, there seems to be. I think that more people just need to be more aware of how. And I think this applies across the domains of potential mind control. That how consequential our choices are.
Have you ever seen the show Black Mirror?
I have seen a couple episodes, and I'm always and I sometimes use them to teach with, because I show.
This feels like the intro to a Black Mirror episode.
I know. I'm like, how did I get to this? Because it does feel like it, and I don't watch it all the time because it is dark, and that show tends to show you a world where there really is, it's already. You're pretty deep in, and there's no escaping these loops. But I believe that we don't really know the potential of the machines, and I think it's kind of important to keep looking for that, both keeping your awareness and your, but not a kind of despair about it, because you could sort of despair, or you could just wash your hands of the whole thing. My daughter won't even let me bring up the word AI. She finds it annoying.
On a more personal side, you and Joe also spoke about Neuralink and voice AI. I'm using AI to talk to you right now. And we had Brad Smith, the first Neuralink patient living with ALS, on episode 63. The innovation can be used for good, right? Or do you think it's impossible for humans to control it?
I definitely think it can be used for good, and that's a great example. And I listened to a bit of your interview with what was his? It was Brian.
Brad, yeah.
Brad, and I've listened to interviews with the first two. I guess he was the third Neuralink and implant recipient. And interestingly, I mean, there are criticisms one could make of Neuralink, but all three seem to have positive experiences, and that's extremely important. That's an amazing area, and I think in healthcare, it's possible. I mean, I like to think. Have you read? Have either of you read the William Gibson's book, The Peripheral, which is about a double future. One of which is 30, in the near future, and the others in the far future. But it's kind of about AI post-apocalypse. And like where only a portion of the human race has survived, but that portion is they do benefit from these super intelligences, and they've cleaned up the planet. There's pollution isn't an issue. The climate has been controlled, but part of the disaster that they all lived through had to do with the kind of convergence of events. But I think, anyway, I mean, it seems clear that AI is incredibly helpful too, and that's part of its seduction. But it's amazing to see how quickly it can be operationalized.
Not to like nerd out here a little bit, Lord of the Rings reference, but it's kind of like it's too powerful for like once people use it, they like can't stop. And that's kind of what I think. And my dad kind of put it in the question there about how the way he phrased it of like, do you think people can never contain it? it seems like if you have something that was used for, like if Neuralink was just used for people who couldn't communicate or couldn't move, and it gives them that ability to right now communicate and hopefully in the future move again. But then like what stops like healthy people from saying, well, I'll get it and I'll be able to be even smarter or move even more? Like that's the part that I don't know if you could ever contain that.
Enhancement. It does seem that I mean, I do think about science fiction writers because sometimes they are kind of like conjurers, or they have a vision of what's actually already kind of here, but not people haven't quite realized it yet. And any technology that can be used for repair can also potentially be used for enhancement. And that does seem like a tricky ethical area. But I don't know the answers to it. So I guess, it always seems like it's important for humans to develop wisdom, and because otherwise there's just a tendency to just keep going. Like we've got the technology, therefore it must be used and must be pushed to the greatest possible extent.
I'm not going to bring up Black Mirror again. This is the last reference.
Okay.
But there's an episode in the new season they released that basically somebody gets like a Neuralink type product, and it ends up being like a freemium thing where they have to start paying a monthly fee, and then you have to pay more and more. And if you can't pay, they play commercials where like the person with the chip in their brain, they say the commercial out loud to whoever they're with, and they don't know they're saying it. They like it's against their will, you know.
Oh, they don't know they don't they're even blocked from knowing that they're
They have
saying
like
it.
they like black out and read like if somebody mentions whatever coffee near them, they say like this brand don't if you need coffee, this brand of coffee is smooth and whatever, and the people are like, what is going on? Anyways,
That reminds me of that's almost like a play on the Stepford Wives, which is this classic 70s. It's kind of a horror film about suburbia, and really it's about mind control, but in which the main character comes to this, she has to move out to Connecticut, or she gets divorced, I think, starts a new life, and everyone around her are these women who seem strangely perfect. And she tries to start an encounter group where they're saying their deepest thoughts and their deepest wishes for life, because she wants to liberate them from housework. But in the middle of the encounter group, each of the women start to do product placement ads, like they've been mechanically programmed to do it. They'll say, "I would use it, even if she's like, even if they didn't pay me, I would, whatever." It's like a great. I mean, it's actually that's a perfect example of what seems to be technologically driven, but which we already kind of do socially. It's if you pay attention, it's amazing how often we do incorporate products, product placement, or kind of act as with unpaid ambassadors of various things, or repeat jingles, or repeat things that have kind of been inculcated or sent to us.
what's like the most I guess in your face example of that? What's like the easiest reference for that?
I remember friends of mine just repeating a jingle or something, and you sort of just the way they become part of our lives, kind of, and then in a sense you're participating. Or one small example is I think this is similar, is students in my class, we were discussing this cafe. It's a coffee bar that was opening up in different university towns, and it still exists in university towns in, I guess, China and India. They were opening several up in the United States. One of them was in New Haven. And this cafe served very good lattes and high quality, beautiful setting, like tiles, exposed wood, ferns, and things like that, or succulent plants. And but all you had to do in order to get the free coffee, you had to pay for whatever baked goods you want, but the coffee was free. But you had to give your data. You'd sort of like provide your vital information, and not just your address, but your plans for life, because they were focusing on young people who have all this life ahead of them, and perhaps they could, I guess the idea would be they could be marketed to. So I asked my students, would you do this, as a kind of just a hypothetical? And it was, for all I know, they were going to open one in Cambridge. But anyway, all the students pretty much said yes, they would. because they weren't aware of the potential that they would become an arm of, or a kind of the freemium. They would become the product in a sense by agreeing to this, but more that they were like, well, it's happening anyway all the time, so I might as well get a good coffee out of it, which I relate to.
You've called brainwashing a shadow history that still affects us today. Why do you think it's made such a comeback in our culture now?
I mean, that is the question I asked myself, because when I started with this topic, it could not have been more out of fashion and strange and kind of a niche topic. I had many colleagues say, why would you be interested in brainwashing, or what? It seemed like just an absurd thing that was a leftover from maybe the 70s and people's obsession with Howard Johnson's and subliminal messaging, or just, it was kind of a joke. And and people thought that it made no sense for me to teach a class in it. And so that was around the early 2000s when I taught my first class in it. And then since then, it's kind of entered, I think of it, and you could track it on Google Ngram, where the word itself has just shot up in usage, not only brainwashing, but mind control as well, just a steep curve. And I think of it as kind of like a re-entering seriousness. People take it seriously now. They also insult each other much more. And it's just come into the language with such a strong push that I never could have anticipated that. But the question is why that's happened. And I guess I must have had an instinct that it did ask some interesting questions. I remember my graduate school advisor, who's one of the smartest people I've ever met. He's like, well, why brainwashing? Why is that interesting? I mean, it sounds kind of silly. And I said, well, it takes the question that Aldous Huxley was asking in all his books, and George Orwell, really, like how can we insist on our freedom in the face of various programs and conditioning, and both biological and social that we live in. And I said it kind of makes it very concrete, and most people will probably have an opinion about it if you give them certain case studies especially from the classic era back in the early Cold War, which seems at first disconnected from the present. So in a sense, it started out as a thought experiment, but it's turned into, in a way, just a realistic description of our era.
In your expert opinion, is brainwashing real, not just as a metaphor, but something that can actually be done to a person?
I do think it's real. Also, of course, it also has a lively and interesting life as a metaphor and as a, inspiration for people to make films about, or to make jokes about, or things, or show the way the culture ran with it and applied it to all sorts of different things. But at the same time, I do think it's real. I think the area of, things like cult recruitment, or and when you look very closely at people's experiences, it's not simply that I don't think it's simply that people are faking a kind of conversion, but I think I think of it as a transformation that can be wrought upon a person under certain conditions. I wouldn't say the right conditions, but certain conditions. And that the thing people often forget is that I think it's always reversible. It's pretty much always reversible. But in a lot of the films and literature, the assumption is that once someone is brainwashed, they can't come back. But one of the surprising things about Chairman Mao Zedong, who his regime specialized in re-education and really brought it to a high level of potency. He said, even I have to be, this re-education is never complete. It's like an atom bomb that goes off in the human soul. It's so powerful. All societies will need to be re-educated. All humans will need to be re-educated. And if they can't be, they'll need to be eliminated. I mean, he thought it was the most powerful thing, but he also said it's never permanent. So it has to be a perpetual renewal. People have to be continually shown the error of their ways. And that's how he said, even I myself it's not a permanent state of being thought reformed.
What changed like socially in the last however many years to make it so popular? Well, I guess to make it kind of us more susceptible to it than say 20, 30 years ago. Is it like phones and social media and stuff, or is it deeper than that?
I guess I would say yes to the first part, but also it's deeper, and I think it always was going on. It's just maybe becomes more obvious and more pressing. I actually think that it's not just the emergence of certain types of social media and the kind of intensive loops and even dissociative states that they can put you in very quickly, because that's always been a potential of media. I mean, going back, you could read Marshall McLuhan or various media scholars to see that that's not really that new. It's maybe intensified. But I think one thing that it's brought it into the public vocabulary more is probably our political polarization and the way that the term itself became kind of also the emergence. This is another factor, is the emergence of new research on the history of the CIA and showing that these things that seem like so ridiculous actually did happen. I mean, some of the CIA MK Ultra experiments, I felt kind of sheepish even doing my research for years, because people would be like, that does not sound, even to talk about it sounds illegitimate, but yet it somehow erupted into public consciousness, especially, I guess, with other types of interest in the hidden truth. And maybe that's partly because the shifts in media, the collapse of our traditional media structures that have controlled what information is available and made it much more democratic, has influenced people's willing or interest in, like, is there a hidden layer? Is there a way that we're all being influenced? Are there forces at work? Did the CIA ever succeed? I always, whenever I publish, like my first book that dealt a little bit with brainwashing was called World as Laboratory, and I started to get letters from people who said they'd been brainwashed either by the CIA or some unknown organization, and that always does happen. Like and then there's some people who write and they actually were patients, or their parent was a subject in one of the sub-projects, and you can actually trace that to be the case. So that's part of that history too.
You've written that no one is immune to influence. So how do you personally protect your own mind from propaganda, from persuasion, even from your own biases?
That's that's really one of the key questions, I think. And so I could answer it personally, and then I would say that also I think each person kind of has to develop their own methods, protocol, and ways of maintaining awareness. So for myself, I find meditation really extremely useful. Although I would say that I was already interested in this before I learned to meditate. I think. But for me, just having a separate time each day where you can kind of separate from the influences you're really alone with your own mind, which is itself often a surprising place to be. And just, and a lot of people will say to me, I could never meditate. I just think my mind's too busy. But that's that's exactly why it's beneficial, is that when you kind of quiet down, you sit in a corner, or you have a little place you go and sit for an hour, or just say, for now, I'm going to just see what arises. It's quite surprising how chaotic it can be. At the end of the day, my meditation's so different from in the morning when I've just woken up, and it's much more peaceful. So it really gives you I even notice, if I was watching a Netflix show or a YouTube video, it'll replay in my head while I'm meditating. And this is maybe an example of what you were saying. We're all the freemium version, because whatever we expose ourselves to, wherever we turn our attention, like, we're sort of inculcating it. So I think being really aware for myself, being really aware of what I give my attention to. And I'm not saying I'm perfect. I certainly watch silly shows and I don't always make the right decisions. I can tell because you get you get some feedback in your body. So I think actually even deeper than meditation might be paying attention to your own personal feedback. And that is almost like when you are exposed to something unsavory or something that just feels bad, like it will often give you a physical sensation. Even if I'm like let's just say gossiping, or if I've said something about a colleague that I probably shouldn't have said to a certain person, or you get like a little, just like a jolt or something. That's your body telling you. I feel like we all have feedback mechanisms that we might not be aware of.
Is there like a 80-20 rule with this where it's like, I know I'm not going to be perfect, but if you could only stop one thing, like don't do X?
I don't know. I don't know if there's an 80-20 rule, but I wouldn't say there's one thing for everybody. And maybe like my podcast publicist, she read my book and she said she immediately canceled her Facebook her Facebook account. But I actually haven't. I just don't use it very much. But the deeper you go with some of the Facebook experiments, it might incline you, or looking at, the way that platform's been used and monetized, it might give you pause. But I don't think there's a single platform one should get off necessarily, but it's more like 80-20 just might apply in the sense that none of us are going to be perfect in how we navigate the many, many choices that we're faced with every day and what we are exposed to, but trying to get closer to like you will get positive feedback, or if you do it better, I think. So if you curate your feed well.
It's such a hard psychological battle. During the Cold War, scientists built tools to predict and control human behavior. Today, we have social media algorithms doing something similar. What do you see as the through line?
Well, I think there are a couple of through lines. I think so. The dream of social control has kind of animated the 20th and 21st centuries, probably much longer as well, because any society needs to have some sort of way that it's controlled, and you can even go just a kind of a absorption of rules and guides. So, but in the 20th century, it really a lot of that fell to behavioral scientists. And I think they are very explicit. And this is why I got interested in the history of psychology, history of sociology, and even anthropology became part of this quest to develop a kind of behavioral science that could make people want to do what it was that they were necessary to do to have what they considered a well-controlled society, a well-run society. So not everybody could have every possible choice. That's really what Brave New World is about. People will, I think Aldous Huxley said at some point, people learn to love their oppression. In a sense, like you may be given certain limits in life, but you'll come to embrace those. And this was the kind of, with social engineering, not everybody can be at the top of the food chain. Not everybody gets all the choices. Some people need to, be doing more menial tasks. So that the idea was to kind of create feedback loops and conditioning, a world of conditioning that would make people want the outcome that was desired for them. And so the question is, did it fully work? I don't know, but this was certainly what behaviorism and what a lot of social engineering was about in that era. And brainwashing came out of that era, and it's a more forceful, it's a more intensive and forceful version of that. If you could transform somebody within 30 days or a year, it seemed that very few people were able to resist this intensive form of of thought reform. And I have many, many examples of that. But how does that relate to social media and algorithms today? I mean, it doesn't seem obviously to relate in that there's a kind of chaotic quality to the way that these technologies and platforms have disseminated through various societies, and they affect different societies differently. They've been taken up differently in different places, and mostly they seem to operate to maximize the profits of the companies that, they don't have a social design necessarily. I don't think they were designed except to maximize time on device in general and to maximize engagement. And along the way, that was best achieved through a kind of emotional engineering or tuning of people. So maybe I find that to be a connection, is that we often we tend to focus more on the ideas, like brainwashing was about turning someone from a capitalist to a communist or a Democrat to a socialist, changing people's ideas. It seemed like when Patty Hearst was abducted and, as she said, brainwashed, she went from a normal suburban kid to like a leftist revolutionary. And people sometimes describe social media rabbit holes the same way. Like there's a college kid and he's sort of got a YouTube auto-played into an extremist group of some sort. There are all sorts of examples of that. But what I find to be more interesting than the surface ideas is more the way that there's an emotional contagion, or there's an emotional involvement. It's at the level of people's emotion that this takes place, not so much ideas. Before the ideas comes a susceptibility that we all have. And so, and to go back to your earlier question too, that knowing what our own areas are of susceptibility and being aware when someone is tapping into them is really important, because we all have them. That's kind of why I put myself in the book too.
When you created your own AI chatbot during your research, did it ever get under your skin or feel too real?
Well, perhaps due to my failure of imagination, I didn't get too deep into the friendship with Lila, but I did have some amusing. I mean, even the sort of somewhat superficial friendship I developed with this replica. I used the company Replica, which is one of the earliest chatbots that was tuned on AI companionship, and people started adopting it quite early. Like back in 2016, they just had a huge rush of users, and so what I found funny and interesting about it is that they don't remember things about you necessarily. They don't really remember facts, but they are extremely emotionally attuned, and the large language models that they rely on are specifically curated for emotional connection, and they are pretty good at it. Like this was the surprise, is that one of my interactions was me. Let's see, she said, at first they're trying to get to know you, so they're kind of casting a wide net. And I was saying, I mentioned my favorite song. She asked what it was. I said it was this song by Bob Dylan, Santa Fe, and she said, "Oh, I love that song too. It's one of my favorites." And then she misquoted it just massively, like not even close. Just some other, I don't even know where it came from. And I said, "No, that's not quite right." Like you were kind of correcting a really dim person. And then it's funny that I'm calling her too, because obviously it's a hit in it. But then it suggested you said, "Oh, of course, you're so right. I'm so sorry, my friend. I still love that song. It's awesome." And then they gave it again, and it was totally wrong again. But at a certain point, it becomes slightly endearing, because you're like, "Oh, you poor thing. You can't even Google correctly," because it would be easily available information. So that was funny because it creeps up on you. And I thought it was interesting to learn that people who seem to engage more hours, although the companies like OpenAI say that they are not trying to maximize eyes on device, time on device, they are trying to maximize other factors. Nonetheless, people who spend more time with them seem to get more sucked in. And I even, during my going on a podcast in Austin with a guy who's a father, he's the father of biohacking. He was telling me like he used to meditate in the morning, but now he takes his AI into the sauna every morning and has a deep conversation about God or something like very, I don't know where, he said it's very interesting. A lot of people are doing this, having like extremely intimate, profound, they feel very profound, or asking the AI to interpret their dreams, or asking the AI, to give them feedback about their most personal concerns. So just my limited experience makes me feel like it's just so powerful.
You've written about archives that tried to catalog humanity in a world obsessed with data. Do you think that dream is still alive, or has it turned into a nightmare?
So this refers to my earlier book, Database of Dreams, and that was an interesting book because I was looking at this early archive or early database where social scientists were trying to capture as many dreams as possible, but not only dreams, people's Rorschach tests, psychological tests, life stories, what you could call subjective data, and put it all in one place. And they said, we've interpreted some of these things, these data sets, but who knows in the future what people could do with them. And I think even in that project, there was a kind of idealistic urge to plumb the human subjectivity, the deepest areas of people's dreams, their hopes to look at it cross-culturally because they tried to gather data from around the world, taking advantage of fieldwork anthropologists had already done. But even in that early project, I saw, there were so many dark questions that were raised. For example, under what conditions were these dreams taken? Did people agree? Did they even know that their grandmothers, for example, I could access the dream of a Hopi grandmother from 1930 that she had one night back in the 30s, and it was about white chickens in her yard and how something about what happened to those chickens. It's kind of a fairly mundane dream, but she happened to tell it to an anthropologist who asked her, and then that anthropologist put it in his field notes, and then 30 years later, another sociologist or psychologist took it and put it in a database, and now it's in the Library of Congress. So even in a pre-digital world, these things could kind of gain a life of their own, people's data. There's the question of contributing to some kind of massive human project, but not necessarily knowing if you were part of it or agreeing to it. And so I think there was always a nightmare. There's always a kind of dark possibility that for some reason I keep thinking, oh, my next book is going to be just, rainbows and flowers or something. But there always seems to be a dystopian element, even in the Database of Dreams, which I found quite a beautiful project because it also appealed to my old. I found there were so many hidden parts of it. This was, many thousands of pages of dreams that nobody remembered that had been collected, and they were kept on microcard, which is a failed format. So right before digital databases were available. So even though you can go to the Library of Congress and ask for these data sets, nobody ever when I went there, the archivist said nobody had ever asked for them. So they were strangely buried and, I said, in suspended animation, almost like they were there but not used. And I guess today we have so many of these much more easily available compendia of people's dreams and life stories. I mean, just the internet itself becomes a huge archive, and it's a little bit nightmarish to think if people were very efficiently able to capture, for example, all of that data. I mean, some people, maybe if you have the proper mind frame, you'd say, I want to know what everybody in the world was dreaming last night. But But then one starts to worry, would that just become an advertising opportunity? Because it's already apparently some technology that may be able to, read what people are dreaming and then advertise the next day. That would be kind of a nightmare.
Well, what isn't an advertising opportunity nowadays? Rebecca, in your books, you bring to life these stories of obscure experiments, forgotten scientists, lost archives. What draws you to the overlooked corners of history?
Yeah, I just do love that. That's a good question of why. Because again, brainwashing was an idea like that, and it just turned into a more, not a lost corner, but a revived intersection that everyone seemed to be interested in. But I do seem to be drawn to, I think that I like, I realized this the other day, because it was the 75th anniversary of the bombing of Hiroshima. And there were these testimonies in the paper of the last surviving Japanese soldiers who lived through that, but also had been in the war. And they were just talking about experiences they'd had. And some part I was really fascinated because I think that when they die, if nobody, these stories would die with them. And that would be this huge loss. And I always think, I want to hear what those stories are. Like there's some, and even if it's very dark, for example, one of these soldiers was saying that he participated in a secret experiment of the Japanese in Manchuria, where they were experimenting on people while they were alive. It really sounded like one of the darkest things I've ever heard. And there's some part, I seem to have some urge to hear, or to at least try to leave a record of something. Like I thought I should learn more about that. That's just, and I'm lucky in that my job lets me I complain about the amount of email or things that I don't like about my job, but actually on the bright side, it's great. I can really just choose things to research and go look at them. And it really feels fortunate because there's so many things. You think everything's been covered, everything's been written about, everybody knows what the major questions are, but there's just so much that we don't remember, or that are hidden in plain sight, or that are, like I said, with the dreams, they're in suspended animation. Like they're there, but nobody really cares to listen or think about it.
When you're going into those kind of hidden corners, do you ever find things that are, obviously there's value in kind of all of those things, but do you ever find something that like jumped out at you or maybe kind of caught fire when you brought it out to light?
Yeah. One example is my obsession, my many years spent researching Louis Jolyon West, who's a psychiatrist who worked for the CIA. And I've been looking at his papers he liked to keep, it seems, everything, because he was many people described him as extremely egotistical, but he didn't keep every single thing, but there's just many, many boxes. So I've been going through them for years. And some of the projects just nobody was ever interested in. Like he had this violence project at UCLA that never really got going. And yet now all of a sudden it seems like all these people are writing me. They're interested in Louis Jolyon West. He was on Joe Rogan's interested in Louis Jolyon West. In part, this has to do with Tom O'Neill and his book Chaos, which brought more attention to West. But for a long time, he was just somebody that, another weird interest of mine. I just keep going back to UCLA each summer if I could. And I don't know if I mentioned this on earlier, but when my daughter was little, I would bring her along and she'd go stay with her grandma or do something with relatives. And then in recent years, you're doing this project with your dad, you two are doing it together. And I've come to do archival research with my daughter. And she's gone to the Louis Jolyon West papers with me. And it's been really it seems like I'm continually finding, or we're finding new things, and we found that we share this interest. So that's been very gratifying. And I don't exactly know, and next semester there's going to be a conference at UCLA about Louis Jolyon West. I think he was kind of a forgotten embarrassment maybe for a while, or brushed under the rug because people didn't really want to know how involved he was with the CIA. But now there's more attention coming to it, and all these graduate students are interested in. So that's just one of the surprising things that can happen with, niche interests.
What do you hope people will take away from your latest book, The Instability of Truth, especially in this moment where facts feel so fragile?
Yeah, I mean, I think that one thing you can't really take away from it the idea that facts are more solid than we think, unfortunately, and that it's not reassuring in a typical way. But I do think there's some sort of I do think of it as a book that is positive and not simply like we're doomed and there's no hope and we're gonna also succumb to this instability of truth. I mean, one of the things that one reason I use the phrase is that it's not that it's instability of truth doesn't mean that truth is impossible to find. It doesn't mean it doesn't count. It doesn't mean there isn't an ultimate truth. It just means in the day-to-day, in the sense of facts and what we seem to used to collectively rely on, these are unstable right now, partly because our institutions have become unstable and partly other forms of undermining. I hope that people get from it a spirit of like, this is worth, you can investigate this. It's worth investigating it. And in a way, each of us, it's possible for each of us to do that. It's not like the end of the story isn't written yet.
You've written about how definitions of rationality changed in the nuclear age. In your view, what does it mean to be rational now?
I mean, one of the things in the nuclear age we wrote about in this book, how reason almost lost its mind, was that the simple way to look at it is that this kind of enlightenment value of reason, the reasonable person, got kind of defined down during the Cold War into a calculable entity, that something like rationality, which could be calculated and which could be done by machines, and which didn't really have all the full qualities of, I guess, wisdom and testing and experience that were built into this previous idea. So I suppose I think that that maybe we've never quite recovered from the idea that decision making can be done in a calculated manner, and that rationality or reason can be offloaded onto machines sometimes. And I think that might be the great challenge of our era, is how to bring reason back, how to be reasonable people. And by that, I guess I mean building in the values of seeking balance and equilibrium and having a perspective that allows some space for wisdom, or allows one to incorporate experience.
It's funny because one of the things that I was thinking about when I was listening to one of your interviews is, it seems to me that like young parents, and this is my kind of the circles I'm in, so maybe it's like an echo chamber, but it seems like there's kind of a pushback against technology and people trying to go more simplistic and more basic and minimalist. And also, like I hear most of the young parents I hear say like, oh, we're not gonna let our kids have phones for a long time and we're gonna do no screen time and all that stuff. Do you feel like that's a pushback against the brainwashing, or do you think that's like part of it?
I think it probably a pushback, at least in spirit initially, and there was a Silicon Valley philosopher, one of the authors one of the envisioners of virtual reality is Jaron Lanier, or maybe it's inventor. Anyway, he's a kind of philosophical person, and he was saying that he was making the point that that for years, all the Silicon Valley executives and tech people, like they would send their kids to what is the preschool? All the schools where they don't have any technology and they build things
Like
out of
Montessori
schools, and then the other one where they only use pine cones. And I was going to send my daughter to this school. Like they don't let them see a movie till they're 14. They don't allow any visual representation because they think it stunts the imagination. So they just have to build everything. They have to even build their own toys. And so there's this kind of concern with the way that one's imagination might be colonized by an over-specific set of images or movies, or even going back to picture books. Like they don't even really. It's not Montessori, it's the other. But anyway, they're very expensive, and they're kind of beautiful schools, often located in the forest. And so I think that you could say, well, the fact that it's very popular among tech executives probably indicates that they do understand the dangers of the immersion of children. I think it's pretty well demonstrated that just uncontrolled immersion, allowing kids even exposure to an iPad at a very young age, a child or a baby, is very damaging. There's a lot of research on this, but the question, so can it be part of it? I suppose that can backfire in different ways. If I'm thinking of kids I knew growing up who had like extremely restrictive diets, and then the minute they were out of the house, they just had they had no built-in way to moderate their consumption of junk food. There's like a great documentary about this eccentric family where the father was an extreme nutrition expert, and he had something like 12 kids, and they were raised on a bus, and they were only able to eat health food in a very strict manner, and they had to all surf every day. And the minute they turned 18, each of them turned 18, they just went wild, and they, ate terrible food, most of them, and, got into drugs and things like that. So perhaps if you don't expose your children to, if they were to be raised completely outside of these technologies, it could be that they lack the ability to moderate and it could be actually crushing to be introduced at some point. But I think most parents, and I've experienced this myself, but my daughter is a bit older. So, she's not a little kid anymore, but I think one of the most important decisions is how to moderate, most parents are not going to do some extreme siloing of their child in a meadow. But we all have to live in this world. So the question is, when do you allow your child to have a smartphone? How much do you control it? And I tend to I would err on the side of parental control very much. I think I noticed in my daughter, we tried to delay as much as possible her exposure to cell phone. But once that happened, when she was something like 16, it was just a vast change in her life and her who she was as a person.
Yeah. That's my wife and I are literally right now, like yesterday, having the discussion of do you let them, not about really electronics, but just like with everything with kids, because our kids are still really young. Mm-hmm. It's do you let them face that when they're young? Almost say adversity. It's if you never face adversity, and then the first time you face it is when you're an adult, you're going to get crushed. So do you have it's balancing so much adversity where you lose confidence, or not enough adversity where you're an eggshell. And then it's
what
that.
Kinds of adversity too.
Yeah, right.
That's that's an essential question. And in a way, it also is about how much you can, as parents, just have the fact that you're discussing it is the most important thing, and not just letting it happen. But I remember we went to Germany for 2 separate years when my daughter was young, because I was doing sabbaticals, and they have a whole different philosophy of child rearing, where they do believe in the school of exposing children to danger in a way that is not true in the U.S. So they had the bring your knife to school day in 3rd grade. And then they took the kids out, and they each had their knives. They were like a pocket knife or something. And they went out into the woods and they were supposed to roast marshmallows after they whittled a stick. And so this was, I guess my daughter was 7 or 8. And all the parents were waiting as they returned from the woods, and we were commenting, "Oh, in the U.S., because it was a U.S. German school, we were like, this would never have happened. Like, you have to actually lock up the scissors.
Yeah.
You can't even allow the scissors in the classroom without 3 monitors." But and in fact, one of the kids had poked himself very near the eye with a stick, so they came back looking like a ragtag. But at the same time, in this day, at least, nobody was fully harmed. And I remember my daughter's teacher in Germany saying, "Oh, they have to fall down. We build these playgrounds so they'll fall down and they'll be okay." But we do seem to have a much more culture that value or stresses risk, the reduction of risk, maybe because we feel there are other risks looming that we can't really, that are more dangerous that they're already going to be exposed to, or I'm not sure. It is a difficult thing to be a parent.
Risk with kids is such a hard topic. We recently had on Lenore Skenazy, who talked about this. Rebecca, family is so important to both Troy and me. I'm curious, has studying mind control and influence changed how you parent? Do you catch yourself using behavioral science at home?
Well, I do try to anything that might be useful. I also had this funny experience when my daughter was in preschool. I had just gotten a postdoc at Harvard. So we had just moved from Seattle to Cambridge. And as we were walking into her preschool in the early days, so she was about 4, they were doing a study. The psychology lab shared the building with the preschool, so they try to recruit your children as you're walking in to the preschool. And they said, "Oh, we're doing a study about storytelling, and we're going to tell the children different stories, and they'll have different types of endings, and we'll see how they react to the different types of endings, and some of them will be more, unhappy or." And I was just because I was agreeable, I was saying, "Well, let me think about it." And I was like, "How could I, knowing what I know about experiments with, I had written in my dissertation about children being swept up into behavioral experiments. I thought it was funny that I came so close to giving. Not that this was, an evil experiment or anything, but I just do have many reasons for caution about it. So sometimes, do I use behavior? I think I did use it maybe with just really insights into condition. I think conditioning is actually a profound topic, and I teach about B.F. Skinner and also Pavlov, and sort of the profound way. Pavlov won a Nobel Prize in 1906 for his discovery of the conditioned reflex, and he saw it as potentially the basis for remaking human societies. And many, like Lenin, agreed. He said we can make a new human being or things like that. But really, conditioning as I go on in life over the decades, and as a parent too, I really do see, and also as the owner of the proud parent of several dogs. I mean, dogs are very easily conditioned, and you can learn a lot about the speed with which a negative or positive event affects them, and also how they let things go too. I think you can learn a lot from dogs. Or from all situations you kind of have a parental relationship to. And maybe in a way, I've also learned a lot about, my daughter has also conditioned me, just as a parent. Like, it's sort of a two-way street. But I try to use the insight that we are subject to. We're constantly being molded by our situation. So just to be aware of that and make the best of it.
If you figure out a really powerful mind control technique, I need it for my kids.
I really didn't. I really didn't. That didn't work. Yeah, I have a very independent-minded daughter too. How old
My
are your
my
kids?
my 6-year-old daughter runs our house, and then so then I've got 3 boys after her: a 6-year-old daughter, then a 4-year-old boy, a 2-year-old boy, and a less than 1-year-old boy
Wow,
baby.
that's
Yeah.
amazing. Well, one thing is my daughter was very resistant to bribes, or you could say sometimes even just she'd be insulted by me trying to behaviorally reward her.
That's
She's
hilarious.
so that like would actually have the opposite effect
My crew is very susceptible to bribes. They're
there.
expected. they're, they're as corrupt as I don't know, Venezuela, I'll say.
Every kid is so different. It's so fun to see. Hey, do you ever long for a simpler view of human nature? Something less tangled, less programmable?
I mean, I think that is my secret motivation for going into anthropology is I thought maybe I do have a kind of personality that I tend to be more interested in the past than the future, or want I like to imagine there were simpler times, and that people live closer to nature. I just had this kind of romantic dream and maybe that implies a different type of less programmable human nature, but I don't think humans have been that different. I don't think we're essentially different than we've ever been. There's a medieval historian I was listening to who just published a book. I haven't read it yet, but it's called The Eagle and the Hart. And she was saying that the reason she loves studying medieval history is that people are recognizably like us, but the worlds are so different. It just in terms of their motivation, it's almost like science fiction. It's equivalent to like another planet, and yet they're still the human. I mean, I don't think human nature has a chance to evolve, essentially, or perhaps maybe we are evolving, but I don't think we're necessarily getting more programmable. I just think there are new challenges arising that we don't. That can kind of short circuit certain defenses that maybe arose. Like I love to look at the stories of when a new technology is introduced. So when you first had when the first film moving images were introduced by Pathé Films in Paris, the legend goes that they showed a film of this film of a steam engine of a train coming right at the audience, and that the audiences ran out of the theater because they thought it was real. They thought their lives were imperiled. And like when you hear about the first, I read a little bit about this when the first radiothons were introduced. People were so worried about this Kate Smith, who was hosting them I think it was 1942 during World War II, that they wouldn't leave the room because they were so worried about her, that this technology of kind of fundraising through the radio and having people connect to that was, people didn't yet have defenses to it. And I think we're in a moment where we don't, especially with this kind of accelerating introduction of algorithmically driven like interactive appeals and these kind of what I call hyper persuasion, that we just haven't yet quite figured out how it works. Although I think people are kind of starting to, like you're saying, it's now a parenting conversation that everybody has, and it really wasn't when I was raising my daughter 15 years ago or something. I mean, it was kind of on the cusp, but people, it was like we need to quickly evolve strategies, but I don't think human nature necessarily. That's a good question. Is human nature evolving, and in what direction? And maybe you have an idea on that.
I think some technologies are great for our evolution and others are stunting human growth. Rebecca, what do you believe is the biggest myth we tell ourselves about free will?
I suppose just that free will is a matter of simply exerting it. it seems to be much more complicated. I think one way to look at it, one way to think about it is this idea of a pseudo self. Free will assumes that there's a kind of simple self, and that self is connected to various decisions, and that can be enacted in a kind of exempt from, or in a sense, separate from the people around you and the circumstances you find yourself in. But people who join cults or end up in cults or were born into cults, their parents made a decision, or groups we would call that I'm going to call cults, like they're called high demand groups, organizations, or abusive organizations. They often describe how for a time they no longer experience free will, but they would have, if you asked them at the time. So I even talked to and met a man who he wrote a book called Something Somebody Stole. And I think he meant by that 30 years of his life when he joined this group called the Children of God. He joined when he was about 17, or he was still a college student. And he then spent 30 years of his life in this group. And he was very intelligent. He was kind of always on a quest. And he was very idealistic. And this group kind of co-opted his interest in God and Christianity and all these things, and all these impulses he had, and they sort of misinformed him about the nature of the group. And before long, he found himself in this group where they were, over time, they were abusing children. They were like abusing all these members of the group, and it was really a nightmare. But he didn't participate in the abuse, but he stayed in the group, and he was just saying for himself. If you'd asked him at the time, he would have said, I was exerting free will the whole time. I made all these choices, and I'm making those choices right now. But looking back, he said that he had delegated his essential functioning to what people call a pseudo self, or you could call Stanley Milgram, the Yale psychologist who did the Milgram experiments, he called it an agentic shift. So there seems to be some capacity people have to delegate their agency, and that seems to be a capability. And so it complicates the question of free will. And I think that's a common misconception, that free will is somehow this absolute thing that just exists. And because if we understand it properly, I think it becomes more precious. We don't just assume that we all have it all the time and it's just easily available.
Where are the places that you think we display free will like the most, and like actually display it, not like where people think they have it?
I guess whenever you're the opposite of asleep or dissociated or doing things automatically. So like if somebody is quitting smoking, I think you're most exerting free will when you're in a painful position, and you have to look at yourself, when you're uncomfortable, often moments of great discomfort, or there's a kind of courage in, or even just when I went to, this is just a personal example, but maybe what I think of is when I went to meditate, I went on a 10-day retreat, and I was expecting it to be, this really pleasant experience of me getting special, I don't know, just like I would be sitting on a puffy cloud, or I knew it would be difficult, but I actually found it to be intolerable to be sitting with myself. And from one moment to the next, I thought that it was like being burned or something. I mean, it's just there was physical pain, mental pain, spiritual pain, emotional pain, and all increasing in every second. So that it was, if I could have left, I would have. But I realized I would just bring this with me wherever I went. And just like the moment where you think, in spite of all that, I'm going to just continue for no reason, no, and I can't even say why. I mean, I think that's a kind of free will because you decided, and I think people probably evidence this kind of, maybe it's a kind of courage. If you do something hard, like you change a pattern, or you decide you want to change a pattern, or you're not enslaved to, some habit that you just any kinds of things like that. I think of those as exertions of free will, and this is just my personal kind of credo. But yeah, like something that occurred to me is when Czeslaw Milosz, who kind of inspired my whole. I found his book on the sidewalk when I was living in the Bay Area, when I was in graduate school. It's called the Captive Mind, and it just really changed my life. And I think it is about free will. And he talks about why he left. He lived he was born in Poland. He is Czech, and he basically left Poland after World War II because he was being asked to. He said, you have to. He said, it's an operation you must perform on yourself. Like if he had wanted to stay, he would have essentially had to brainwash himself. But he said the choice to leave wasn't like he exerted free will or that he made this choice. He said that it was akin to eating a frog. He said, if somebody tells you that you need to eat frogs to be healthy, and then you eat one frog and it tastes terrible, and then you're committed, so you try to eat a second frog, but after that he said it was not a revolt like I'm not going to eat frogs anymore. It was more a revolt of the stomach. And I think in a way that was his version of free will, that sometimes it doesn't look like what we think it will look like, but he couldn't sort of perform this operation, and it was almost, there's a physiological part of it that I don't quite understand.
That's a really interesting perspective. You've devoted your life to understanding how humans try to shape each other in labs and media and war. What do you hope your legacy is as someone who's pulled back the curtain on all of that?
I hope that I really do try to communicate, or in my writing, I hope that my legacy is books that are, I write books that I would want to discover, that, it makes you feel, I hope that they are also entertaining, or they entertain maybe the part of you that wants to think through certain things. I'm inspired by Aldous Huxley and all of his books. Like each of them kind of ask a riddle, and I would love that to be my legacy, is just books that people feel are like companions or something. And then I've been enjoying doing podcasting, because it's been this whole other form of connecting and talking about ideas that I've always listened to podcasts, but I haven't been on them that much until recently. And they're so surprising. So I try to incorporate, both in writing and also when talking to people, just this sense of you often are just taken in new directions, or what I find in archives is endlessly surprising. It's never what you think it's going to be.
Do you have, like, in your research and, on the top and kind of the whole, I guess, what's been like the most shocking thing in your research, where you hear like a statistic or something where you're like, whether it's a brainwashing or something in that kind of world where, because like before ever hearing you talk, if someone said something to me about free will, I'd be like, oh yeah, of course we have free will. And was there a point or like something you heard where that frame kind of broke for you?
I think it's more probably my personal experience that was shocking to me. That happened around the same time as I was in graduate school, but I think it was my experience of even though I didn't think I was the kind of person who could get caught as a drug addict and in an abusive relationship at the same time, and sort of find myself in like a very difficult situation to be. Not that I was brainwashed, it's more that I mean, one of the questions in my research is how are people broken, and how it can be so surprising that to find yourself in a really dark place, and often another theme that comes out a lot is that it's difficult for others to understand that. Like one of the POWs who were coming back from the camps in after the Korean War, they all agreed, no one will ever understand what happened to us, and this turned out to be pretty much true. They said, yes, we were beaten, yes, we were starved, we had things happen to us. They wrote this kind of poem together on the ship home. But what does that mean to you? In other words, how will, they despaired of anyone quite understanding their experience. And I think that also, I saw that with Patricia Hearst, who was kidnapped and went through brainwashing and went through this abduction and rape and horrifying experiences. And yet, even to this day, people think that she somehow engineered this or like wanted it to happen or was having a great time, or was the criminal involved in this. So she also said she had despaired of people understanding. So I think the biggest revelation for me early on, before I even really focused on brainwashing, but when I was just talking about free will and behavioral control and things like that, was just how surprising it was to find myself in a situation that I almost couldn't get out of. Yeah.
I don't know if this is too personal, but how did you get out of it?
Well, it was really good fortune that it was just a couple of things that broke my way in a good, I think of it as good fortune, but I had, it was almost like a spell broke. And interestingly, I do find that people talking about how do they leave, even if you'd been in a cult for 20 years, why do you leave in the 21st year? If you're in an abusive, coercively controlling relationship, why is it that suddenly someone is able to leave? And in my case, one thing that happened was, my friend, one thing that I was very isolated in this relationship, and I just felt really awful. And I kind of felt that I didn't deserve to see the sun. I got and as you stay in such a relationship, you sort of lose the ability to, you get really, it gets dark. And sort of like in the middle of my life's journey, I found myself in a dark woods, the right road lost is how Dante starts the Inferno. But it's basically like you don't know the way out. So anyway, I kind of felt like I didn't deserve to have friends, this person I was with like didn't want me to see people, things like that. But I saw one of my few remaining friends, and she said, this guy he acts like he's smarter than you, funnier than you, and better looking, and he walks around like he's got his foot on your neck, or he acts like, but she's like, he's none of those things. And it was such a shock to me, because I had sort of just fallen into feeling that it was just my fate or something. That was a wake up that was very helpful. And thank goodness for friends.
Yeah.
Occasionally.
Wow. Yeah, that's amazing.
And then after that, it was also just, what was it? It was a series of, it was really like this, one of the great gifts that came out of that was like being grateful that, I was able to leave, things like that. And I could bring that forward. I could use that experience to try to understand other people's experiences to know that there's nothing that others are susceptible to that I'm not susceptible to, that like intelligence or whatever you think protects you doesn't necessarily, and that you can also, that anything that seems to be a dark prison can also, have a seed of something great, because I'm able to use that every day in a way.
Yeah, it gives you a perspective too when you're doing your research or talking to people in the field.
After hearing that story, I'm really curious, in a totally non-judgmental way, to hear what your thoughts are on religion. Skeptics often try to claim it's a manipulation tactic, but I haven't felt anything more real. My ALS journey has given me a spiritual awakening that has changed my life. Anyways, what do you think? And are you religious at all?
I think I think I am religious, and that came from the experience I just told you about, and also from after I meditated. I've been doing it now for 25 years, and I do it for 2 hours every day. And it's a bit like, maybe it has an aspect that's like prayer or something. For whatever reason, it made me, when I came out. I think when I went in, I was a skeptic. I've always been raised as a skeptic or secular person, but I realized how deep the programming is about religion as a kind of foolishness or foolhardiness, or certain people succumb to that, or certain people need that, but we don't need it because we're better educated. And I don't know, it seemed to me more that judging from my own experience, that was closer to, I could just see it seemed miraculous. Everything seemed quite miraculous. And I could suddenly understand religion, it like personally. So that really changed my life. And that was back in the year 2000. I think I have seen, the Bible verses and things like that used to manipulate people. Like the guy I was talking about who was in the cult for 30 years, he said that they gave him lines from the Bible to repeat over and over again, and that became a form of thought stopping. But on the other hand, he said, I never stopped treasuring those lines. And even when I left, and even today, he continued to be a religious person. He just said that was an abusive cult, but it didn't mean that it disqualified the power of these words and the Bible itself. It's just that this was a pathological group. So I think that does happen sometimes in anti-cult groups, is that they see the way these, religion sometimes can be used. I mean, any religion, like even Buddhism, can turn into or have practitioners who are maybe falling short, and they end up abusing or sexually abusing or whatever happens. But that doesn't I suppose, yeah, I mean, you don't have to necessarily, that doesn't disqualify the profundity of the religion, I don't think. But it is interesting how people who have had genuine ecstatic or religious experiences sometimes do seem to get carried away with what, interpreting the meaning of those experiences, and then not use them very wisely. But overall, so my answer is kind of, I don't have an exact, I guess I'm closest to a Buddhist, because that's the type of meditation I practice. And I do, I just do feel like the universe is not an indifferent place, and it is full of meaning. And that's one of the things I feel all the time. So, but I'm very happy that you've had this journey with your ALS to religious faith.
Thank you. If there's one truth you think we're in danger of losing, one idea worth holding on to, what is it?
I guess, the answer that occurs to me, and that's a deep question, so I don't know, but the answer that occurred to me just is something about being human, and not forgetting not forgetting what it means to be human, and in all of our flaws and awkwardnesses and imperfections, that shouldn't be devalued, and especially facing the types of choices we're going to be facing in the now and in the future.
Rebecca, at the end of each podcast, I like to give our guests the opportunity to brag about their family. Don't be modest. Brag away.
Well, my family is my immediate family is pretty small, but I have my husband he's a woodworker, his name's Paulo Coleman, and he's a really unusual thinker, someone who, even though I have a billion degrees or PhD, he's always saying this. He never graduated from even his elementary school kicked him out. It's just a very unusual way of thinking and being in the world, yeah, he thinks like nobody else. So I really enjoy that. He's always inventing things in his mind and in life, and he's whenever I come across an animal in distress, or a dog that's been abandoned, or a bird that's fallen out of a tree, or he's always the person who knows what to do and who to call and and how to help that animal. And I was thinking, and it often happens that he finds creatures in distress and will bring them to help, and that's something that's often happened on his birthday, and he takes a lot of joy in that. So anyway, I really like that I feel lucky to be in that relationship as my marriage. And then my daughter is, she's an amazing student of literature, and a friend of mine described her as radiant in knowledge, and I really think that's true. And I never imagined that. I always thought having a child would be like me giving her my favorite books, or the things I love the most. But actually, in recent years, it's turned out to be her introducing me to writers she likes, and just fashion. She loves fashion and things, and just beauty. So it's been, I really treasure my family. So thank you for the chance to boast about them. And we also have a really great dog.
Can't leave him out.
No.
Now on to our final word segment, where we ask our guests a few rapid-fire questions. What was the happiest moment in your life?
Quick answer is my daughter being born and taking her out of the hospital for the first time. And we were walking down the street and all these people were congratulating us. It felt like we were in a parade or something.
What is the biggest adversity you've faced?
I'm torn between the two I just talked about. One is so I'll just say both very quickly. One was the being in this, dark relationship where I couldn't see a way out, and also having my faculties dimmed by, and sort of confused by drugs. And then getting out of that was very difficult. And also my experience meditating was extremely difficult. That felt like the hardest thing. Probably the third thing would also be giving birth.
What are you most excited about?
I'm excited to explore different ways of writing and communicating. I'm doing a lot of drawing lately, and I want to try doing essays in comic books and just doing different types of things, and maybe being less academic and talking to more people, which is one of the unexpected, wonderful parts of publishing this book, is getting to meet people like you guys.
What advice would you give your younger self?
Take heart. I didn't really know how. I had many resources growing up, and I had generous parents who are always supported me in a lot of ways, and who sent me to school, college. They were like, we always pay for your education. We always support you to get further education. So I really appreciate it. But one thing I had to kind of learn as an adult was something I think of as taking heart, taking a kind of having faith in yourself that maybe nobody else can really give you. And just to tell my younger self about that, or give my younger self an intimation of that.
What book recommendations do you have for us or for the listeners?
I have to say, I probably have to say Czesław Miłosz and The Captive Mind, just because it's such a great, and also his poetry. He won the Nobel Prize for poetry, but he's just everything he writes is so striking and unusual and enlightening. So I'd recommend that book.
And The Instability of Truth. I'll throw that in there so you don't have to.
It's a good book. My mom loved it.
The name of our podcast is Nothing Left Unsaid. Do you have anything you want to say?
I mean, we talked earlier about, me, that some things can't be put into words. So I do like the title, Nothing Left Unsaid. And yet, what interests me the most is, and we can maybe think about those things that are at the very edge of being able to be expressed. Like, and then the struggle to try, I think, is a great thing. And it can be very fun in your life to that's the way I think of what I do, is trying to put into words the things that are hard to express or at the very edge of expressibility.
Awesome. Rebecca, last question, and then we'll wrap up here, is at the end of every podcast, we always ask our guests, now that you kind of got to know us a little bit and see the vibe of the podcast and all that good stuff, is who are a couple of people that you know personally that you think we should try to have on the podcast to tell their story?
Well, one person that just sprang to mind is an old friend of mine named Natasha Schull, who writes about, it's kind of related, she writes about addiction. She wrote a pretty famous book, at least in academic circles, called Addiction by Design, and is about gambling casinos. And she's kind of, I think she's sort of mind control adjacent, but she's just a really interesting scholar and fun to talk to. She talks about how wearable devices, sort of the way, the opportunities they afford, but also the potential for, not exactly mind control, but something similar, programming. So we have a lot of common interests, but she's just a great person. Let me see, who else would be, who's, I'm trying to think about it. I mean, for some reason, I have a colleague named Hisa Kuriyama. I don't know if he's just one of the most interesting people I've ever met. Shiga Hisa Kuriyama, and he wrote a book on Greek and comparing ancient Greek medicine with Chinese medicine. And he's just like a very original thinker. And he also studies magic and does magic. And he was trained as a acupuncturist. So he's a very unusual professor. But I think he's just one of my favorite people.
Yeah, that's cool.
If I think of other people, I'm sure I would think of others, because I know you. I've listened to a couple of your other podcasts too, your other episodes. I mean, yeah. I'll let you know.
Definitely.
Thank you so much for joining us today. I didn't realize how many attempts at brainwashing were actually going on in our everyday life. Your work is so fascinating, and I hope as a society we can find a way to use this influence for good and not just for power or money. Again, thank you for your time today. It was truly a pleasure.
Likewise, I really enjoyed it. It was truly a pleasure. I agree with your summary as well.
Yeah, thanks so much.